Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another session of Financial Tides. I'm John Perillo, CFP, and Chartered Financial Consultant with Wealth Navigation Advisors, and my partner and son, Taylor Perillo, CFP, is also on the podcast. Good morning. So today we're talking about planning, saving, and spending over a lifetime. And, those are three different topics we're going to delve into today. Trying to save over a lifetime can sometimes feel a bit like a tug of war between your present needs and future desires, because everyone has immediate needs now, and the challenge is to find that healthy balance. And be surprised how fast time goes. I didn't think I'd wake up at 60, just like yesterday, I was 30. But Ben Franklin said it best: people don't plan to fail, they fail to plan. So the purpose of this is to help you plan a little bit.
Yeah, and I think the problem is there's an immediate satisfaction and instant gratification that you get from spending now. So it sounds more exciting and it sounds more fun, but it's really just about the perspective of things. And I think that people fail to realize that they can do all three. They can save, they can plan, and they can spend all at once. And a lot of people do, and they end up successful and they end up retired and enjoying their retirement to the fullest. But I think that there's a lot of people that don't do those three things and just spend, get by and spend, live hand to mouth, and neglect that saving and planning portion of it that we really kind of want to help bridge the gap. So I think the first thing is just kind of the mental aspect of viewing savings as only a just in case emergency wallet type of emergency fund. And we always talk about having an emergency fund just in case something comes up. So you're not dipping into your assets. But I think that we're failing to mention and have yet to mention about the actual opportunity having a savings represents. And that's setting money aside on a monthly basis to achieve goals other than just your immediate needs and other than just an emergency, and kind of thinking about your future and what some of your other goals might be, whether that's a vacation, putting kids through college, and just saving for those things that are going to come up in life that you really shouldn't be dipping into your long-term assets to really achieve, just for the short-term goal to be satisfied.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that, and Taylor's going to do more on budgeting, but you just need to know what's coming in and what's going out. And that's the simple description of a budget, right? Income on one side, expenses on the other side. And that income could be work income. If you're retired, it's pension, Social Security. It could be rental income, business income, and then the expense side. And I guess I'm gonna leave the budget to Taylor.
Yeah, and I think really it's a three-prong approach to actually getting there. I think the first thing is just careful, very intentional planning. So not saying, hey, I'm just gonna whatever's left over, I'm gonna put away and save. I think having a very intentional plan that's laid out in a way that's gonna help you reach those goals is kind of the first step in it. Then being really proactive about the saving and saying, hey, I don't want to pull in my assets when I need something to fund a goal. I want to be saving in advance of that goal. So when I have the funds, I can really go ahead and do it. And then really strategic spending of spending where you need to, spending to make life enjoyable, but not going above and beyond and living outside of your means and increasing lifestyle at every step of the way. So I know we've talked a lot about lifestyle inflation, so I don't want to really get too deep into that here, but by strategically spending, you're also avoiding the lifestyle inflation. So I think really planning your finances, like we talked about, is really the only way to kind of gain control of the spending and your savings. And it's going to require a very proactive, again, approach and some extra work on your part. But if it means getting to a point of financial independence through it, understanding what your spending is, we're here along the way to help in that process. That's what we do. We're certified financial planners for that reason, is we want to help set up kind of an actual outline for how you need to be living within what your desires are. And then the second step is really just saving money. And that's just saying, hey, here's the amount of income that I have left over after my strategic spending that I'm going to have on a monthly basis, and we call it forced savings. So I like to say that if you're putting that money away and you know that money's gone every single month, you're not going to really have the opportunity to spend it. So that helps both on the controlling spending side of things and also the saving money side of things. So I call it forced savings, even though it's not really forced, you're making the choice to do it. But if the money goes out before you have the chance to spend it, um, you can't really spend it without going and trying to dip into your assets. You never see it in your bank account. And I think there's a lot of problems on the controlling spending side that as you see your bank account growing, you feel that you can spend more rather than saying, hey, that money's aside working towards my other goals for me.
Yeah, and in line with that, a good example would be the 401k, right? We say the discipline is to pay yourself first when with saving, and the 401k does that because now you're operating from a take-home check that is net of a nice savings amount. If you're maxing it out, you're putting 20 something thousand dollars a year into a 401k. You paid yourself first, and that's the ultimate savings tool that most people have available. And for those who don't have it available, there's, you just have to be more disciplined, and we can help with that discipline. So, I mentioned some of the practices that we look at are budgeting. So Taylor's going to tell us about mapping your income.
Yeah, and I think that really the goal, and you're going to hear us say this a lot, is spend intentionally, save intentionally. And when you plan how you're going to save and spend for major life events, there's kind of three main practices that we talk about with employing that are really relevant to any stage of life and any age that you're in. So I think the first one is mapping out your income. So figuring out where you get your incomes from, whether you're in retirement and it's a pension and 401k that you're taking money out of now, or whether it's a rental property that you have or your current income that you have, just making sure you understand where it all comes from, what you're doing with all of it, where it's going, understand the difference between your gross and what the net is that you actually bring in. I've heard it many of times that I make 80,000 a year with a younger client, and they don't realize that 80,000 doesn't really end up in their bank account, and they spend like they are getting 80 to their bank account, but they're not actually realizing that most of it goes to taxes, Social Security, Medicare along the way. So really mapping out your income, know all of it together, what it looks like, and then setting the budget. So once you have your actual take home income that ends up in your bank account figured out, figuring out exactly where it goes, I think that really every budget should include the three different things. It should include your basic fixed income need or your fixed spending needs. It should include some discretionary spending, so life is enjoyable. And then it should include some sort of savings goal every single time. And there's many different budgets, but something like a 50-30-20, where you're spending 50% on basic needs, 30% on discretionary spending, and 20% into savings of some sort is a really good guide to kind of get you started. And different budgets work in different ways for different people, because a lot of times in places like California, you'll say, hey, 50% of my income, I can't live off 50% of my income. So sometimes you have to decrease a little bit of discretionary spending at that point. But I think having all three is always important, because we don't want you to be living miserable with no extra money to spend either. So
Now, you mentioned the budget and the mapping of income, but the third item is identifying the risks. And some of them we can control, some of them we can't, right? So you cannot control the risk of becoming unemployed because of layoffs or something like that, but we can control the risk of dying too soon, right? So that's where we use life insurance, because yeah, the goal is my career is going to help me build up a nice nest egg so I can retire someday and take care of my family. But if I die at 30 years old, how's the plan going to self-complete itself? There's an old saying in the insurance business that if you can't afford to retire, you can't afford to die. So again, the insurance will bridge you. It helps self-completes the plan, right? If the goal is to have $2 million at retirement, buying a $2 million life insurance policy gets you there, if something happens. That's one example. I'll give you another example that's completely different. And let's say I have an 80-year-old home with a 30-year-old furnace. I need to have a sinking fund for that furnace. I need to be able to pay for a big ticket item like that, or a roof replacement. If my roof is 20 years old, and I got a 25-year roof, which is typical what we used to have when I was a kid in New Jersey. 25-year roof. You better start saving over the next 5 years because the roof is coming. And there's no reason that because you're retired that you shouldn't save as well. So there should be a separate savings account that you take some of your cash flow and put it in to restore your emergency funds for every time you need to hack $5,000 or $8,000 out for a big ticket item.
Yeah, and then I think really navigating the major life events is something that people also need to think about. I think a lot of the times people get to the point where they say, "Hey, I want to buy a house and I want to have a kid and other things along the way, send a kid through college," and they don't think proactively about that and they're not intentional about that. So, for example, I think just diving in, and this isn't an extensive list, but when you start thinking, hey, you want to buy a house, that's not something you do the year of. That's something that, and the house is a big one because you have to save a big down payment for it typically. So that's something you should be saying, hey, buying a house is something I want to do in 5, 10 years. I'm going to start being saving towards that now. Buying a car, same thing, a little smaller down payment, or if you're going to buy it cash, which is always a good idea when you're working with depreciating assets, you want to start saving towards that intentionally and have a fund that's going to go towards buying that car. And I think some other things you could do is, for example, my fiance and I were planning on having a family at some point, and one of the things that we're doing is practicing living off of just my income because when she gets to the point where she is going to be a stay-at-home mom and no longer working and caring for our family, then we don't want to have her in a position where we're losing an income. So we're being very intentional in the fact that we're controlling our spending to make sure that we can live off of just one income before we get to that point where it's actually time to have a family. So
Yeah. Speaking of having a family, I was shocked when I was reading the notes for this presentation. Josh put together the numbers. The cost of raising a child in the U.S. from birth to 17 for an average middle income family. We're not talking about the Rockefellers or Tom Brady or anybody. We're talking about the average family. $310,600. And I'll repeat, that was birth to 17. So there was no college in there, you know. So that's, and it also excludes, transportation and recreational activities. So it's just the cost of raising a child. I would imagine that there's some private schooling in there. I'm not questioning the numbers because Josh is pretty thorough in putting this stuff together. But it's just an amazing number. It knocked me off my chair.
yeah, and that number, I've seen the different numbers out there. I don't have them off the top of my head, but with transportation, recreational activities, I think they said to raise a family of three the last time I saw it, because there is some extra savings that you have from having three instead of just one child, but it's over $1 million with everything included, not including college though. So that kind of transitions us to the next point of just sending a kid to college. It's going to be one of the biggest expenses that you face. And very often we see people get to this point and they are not saving for retirement already or have to stop saving for retirement to try to send the children to college, which is fine if you've planned for it. So that goes back to being very intentional about planning and saying, hey, before I have to pay for my child in college, if I'm going to have to stop funding my 401k, then I need to be overfunding it in the years leading up to that so that I'm not falling behind while they're going through college. So I think that, and then using extra income in the form of 529 plans and getting some tax advantage savings. I think there's a lot of different ways that financial professionals such as ourselves can really step in and help out, being intentional about funding college as well.
Yeah, and then so we've talked about college. Now let's shift to retirement because I think that's one of the biggest stress areas I see for people because you're transitioning emotionally from working to not working and from saving to dissaving or spending, and I've often said, and anybody that's known me for the last 30 years knows that I talk about, all the financial media news, written, internet, the TV stations, the 5 financial stations, Bloomberg, Fox Business, CNBC, they're all built around accumulation. You watch the commercials, it's about accumulating and making money. You watch the interviews, it's about accumulating or making money. They never really deal with decumulation. The idea that, okay, now I can no longer add, I have to spend. And that's an area that, that we focus on because it's a much different game and there's very little published about it. There's a lot published, but you got to really go out of your way to find it. So that's why I said earlier, budgeting here is as important as ever. So if we set your portfolio up to the to the max stress that you say, all right, you know what, I'm going to live till 92. I'll probably be gone before then, but let's plan on 92 to be safe. And I want to go broke at 92. So you set the portfolio up for the maximum amount of draw. If you haven't budgeted from that draw and saved some money on the side, when that furnace goes or the roof, you're going to call us up and say, I need $30,000. And let's say you only have an IRA. Now you got to take 40,000 out, pay taxes, and get 30,000. You're compromising your strategy. So I'm just saying that, retirement's a different phase, and we think we're really built well for helping people with that. And most of the people on here know that already because they're living it day to day. And then making consistent contributions leading up to retirement, very important. If you're unsure how much you need, you just go bigger. I always tell people, what can you afford to save and then increase it by 10% day one. So I can afford to save $100 a week. All right, let's save 110. And then next year, expect me to call you up and tell you to bump it to 120 a week. And then the year after 130. So, and we're going to hold you accountable to your savings goals. So that I know I kind of went back off retirement there to pre-retirement, but I just think it's important because, again, one of the big underlying messages here is save, save, save.
Yeah, and then aside from save, 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 there's also plan, plan, plan. So the last part really in planning is the estate plan and figuring out kind of ways to make it clear and comprehensive. So you're transferring any of the estate with the least amount of administrative burden, the least amount of financial burden and tax burdens to the heirs and beneficiaries. So I think having a clear, comprehensive plan is something that is worth noting, being we're just talking about planning as well, as that's a part of planning, making sure everything's in order before you're gone. And I know it's kind of associated with the final stage of life, but it's never too early to make an estate plan. I think when you're having children and you get married, those are perfect times to say, hey, you know what, an estate plan should be something that we have. We have time to modify it and update it along the way because things are expected to change, but we have it in place just in case. You don't want to ever end up in that situation where nothing's written down, no one knows what's going on, and it's a nightmare, and the families has infighting trying to figure it all out on the back end because it wasn't clear and comprehensive. So I think that wraps up really the topics for today. If you guys are ready to save, plan, and spend very intentionally, feel free to give us a call at our office, or you can send us an email. We're happy to get in touch. And until next time, thank you for watching Financial Tides.
Thank you.
John Perillo and Taylor Perillo are financial advisors offering securities through Cetera Advisors LLC, a registered broker-dealer, doing insurance business in California as CFGA Insurance Agency LLC, member FINRA/SIPC. Advisory services offered through Cetera Investment Advisors LLC, a registered investment advisor. Cetera firms are under separate ownerships from any other named entity. California insurance licenses number 0F60123 and 0M90666, 6265 Greenwich Drive, Suite 251, San Diego, California 92122. The views depicted in this material are for information purposes only and are not necessarily those of Cetera Advisors LLC. They should not be considered specific advice or recommendations for any individual. Neither Cetera Advisors LLC nor any of its representatives may give legal or tax advice.